Hey, how you going? Nick here from Raising the Standards. It's like after 10 o'clock at night here, so I'm recording this live, but I will be posting it on the Raising the Standards Facebook page tomorrow because I think all good horse people are probably well and truly in bed by now. But I have literally walked in from the paddocks a little bit earlier, and tonight is one of those evenings that roll around every year. It's the eve of probably one of the first really scary fire danger days here in Victoria. So the total fire ban has been announced and we've all been warned that it's a pretty nasty day coming up. We've got over 40 degrees forecast. I think my area is about 43 was the last one that I checked. I don't even want to look anymore. And there's going to be some wind around. So as someone who lived through Black Saturday, I'm feeling a little bit tense, and I know that a lot of other horse people will be feeling the same way this evening. So I wanted to just give you some quick tidbits, I guess, from my own experiences living through Black Saturday, and then we've had a few subsequent fires in my area which haven't impacted my property directly, but have impacted a few of my friends, and I guess, it started a little bit of conversation on Facebook, and I wanted to, I guess, share my experiences and some stories that some friends have gone through to help you maybe think about things you hadn't considered when it comes to planning for a fire as a horse owner. This evening I've wandered around and taken all fly masks, and some of them have nose flaps, off my stock. Anything that is plastic, synthetic, cotton rugs even, they've got metal clips which can get quite hot in the event of a fire or flap and actually cause a horse to catch on fire. Everything's off. I want my horses completely nude so that nothing can melt onto them, get hot, or as I just said, attract fire to their bodies. I do this on the eve of every total fire ban or extreme weather scenario. That's for all of my horses. I don't leave halters on my horses in paddocks anyway, but if you are someone who does, you need to take them off on the eve before. Even if your horse is hard to catch, getting rid of nylon and synthetic fabrics, which can be flammable, is pretty important, particularly if horses are, shuffling around embers and things potentially after the fire. It's not even just during the fire that's the danger. We used to have 30 horses here at my property, and so fire danger hasn't been a real problem in the last few years because we've been grazed back to literally dirt. Like, my property's a dust bowl. We get a breath of wind and we're just drowned in dust. It's just quite disgusting. But this is probably one of the first years, maybe we've had a couple now, where we've had fuel on the ground in the lead up to fire season, and that makes me really twitchy and nervous. We slashed a couple of nights ago. We're going to bail this year, but in previous years we've actually just slashed fire breaks. I know my property really well, and I think it's important to know your property, where you sit in relation to pretty typical wind patterns. So we tend to get northerlies and southerly winds here that are going to most greatly impact our paddocks. We tend to get a little bit of crosses, but we don't tend to get much from the west or the east hitting our property. So I know that means that our most northerly and most southerly paddocks need to be back to bare, just to stop the fuel gaining momentum as it hits the property and turning a little grass fire into a bushfire sort of scenario. I'm not a fire expert, but I've been told in the past that your fire, and it kind of makes sense, your fire's only going to be sort of double the height of the grass on the ground. You're not going to end up with a towering bushfire if you've got really short grass. That's why they cut fire breaks next to roadsides and things. So that's been a really important part of our preparation as a family. On my property, we have really large paddocks of around 4 acres, and we've seen, having been impacted directly by Black Saturday, sort of the way fire moves. So within every paddock that was impacted, there was always an area which wasn't, and during Black Saturday we had thigh-high grass, so totally different scenario to today, but even so, fire discriminates and jumps around a little bit. So even if we had horses in the paddock at that time, they would have all survived because they would have all been able to move around. But minimizing fuel and having large spaces which are pretty nude and back to no grass is really important. Our fire plan as a family has always been that we will defend, because we are quite a defendable property. As I said in the past, we haven't had grass, we've had dirt and dust. But this year, I've got 2 children, one's a 2-year-old and one's a baby. So my plan is just to go, and if there's any fire activity, I'm going to leave. Now that, as an equestrian, breeds a bit of nervous energy, because I love my horses and I really care about them, and you feel like you're deserting them. But I know from stories that were shared with me after Black Saturday and the Kilmore fires and some other fires in our area, that horses are incredibly intelligent, resilient, and instinctual. And what they will do is they will do what comes naturally in order to survive. So I heard this fantastic story out of the Kilmore fires of horses that ran back into the fire front, not in towering bushfires, but grass fires. They actually were trying to outrun fires, and they realized they couldn't. And some of their owners saw them turn around and run back into the fire. And, they're panicking. But they realized that the horses just ran back through the fire. The front wasn't huge. They jumped through the fire and ran. And they just stood on the burnt ground, because they knew that they couldn't outrun it. There were fences, whatever was going on. So they just turned and they stood back on the fire. And, they singed a few manes and tails and had a few superficial cuts from moving around things, and burnt hooves. But they survived, and they did this without any human intervention. I've got a friend who unfortunately didn't realize the fire was even coming towards her property, because it was like kilometers away. She went to work and then had to, sit there and watch and listen to all of the impacted areas leading up to her property. And she realized she had foals in her paddock and she had knee-high grass, and she was just like, oh my God, everything's going to be dead. She couldn't get back in, roads were closed. And you know what? All of the horses survived. They jumped fences, they circumvented fires, they ended up in all different areas to where they had been paddocked to begin with. But even without any human intervention, with heaps of fuel on the ground, they did what came naturally, and they all survived. And so did some of her, I think all of her smaller stock as well, goats and sheep and bits and pieces. So animals do incredibly well with room to move. We ended up evacuating. My then boyfriend, now husband and chief horse slave, and I took off just before the fire front on Black Saturday. My parents stayed to defend. And we ended up not knowing anybody in the town we stopped at, which was Seymour. So we stayed in a car park at Safeway that night. And we heard this incredible, it's a really, really sad story that a lady told us that her neighbour was really distraught because they had some prize show horses. And they had a couple of stallions who were stabled. And out of all their stock, despite the fact they lived right on the fringe of Mount Disappointment, all of the stock that ran, despite how quickly the fire was moving, survived somehow. And the stallions who were in a relatively cleared area in stables, they died. Probably radiant heat, smoke inhalation. They didn't directly get burnt, but they died. And the owner, she didn't have a chance to do anything anyway, but she, that was her greatest regret. And she realized that, even in the face of this massive inferno, somehow her other horses all survived. So, it was a reminder to her that horses are going to do everything in their power they can to survive. I'm not talking about people who live in forests. If you live in a forest, you know your danger, you know your plans that you need to have, you know your paddocks, you will set everything up, I'm sure. For people who are gist, you need to talk to your gist managers and owners early about what their plan is. And you need to accept that their plan is probably not going to be to start moving around and trying to save everybody's horses. But they will do little things if they're a responsible landowner, like what we have this evening, to minimise the risk on the horses and to have all the paddocks really clear and defendable. And also, if humans happen to go, they're not going to be putting the horses in unnecessary risk. The thing that scared me the most and probably has prompted this video more than anything is that every year when we get to this time of year and a fire inevitably impacts an area where I have friends who have horses, you know, the posts start and they're really distressing. They're like, oh my God, there's a fire coming. It's going to, you know, impact my horse. Can someone help me? I don't have a float. A few years ago with the Kilmore fires, there was, you know, community pages. I followed them pretty closely because I'm an active member of my community and I had property where I could, you know, help people to bring their horses if they needed to. We still didn't know if we were going to be impacted. You know, the posts that started on that were really scary, even just for bystanders, I suppose, for lack of a better word. They were people saying things like, I've got my float, I've got a car, if you need help, I'm on my way, just, you know, give me your address and I'm there. And people were literally, who were completely out of danger, disregarding what the emergency services were saying in our area, which was steer clear, stay off the roads, give us space to move and to contain this. People were actually hooking up their floats and saying, give me a buzz if you need a hand. And then offering to drive, and I believe some people actually did it, into fire danger zones to help people to catch their horses, you know, amidst all the stress and hoo-ha. Try and get them onto a float, which is not easy when you've got a really distressed animal who smells smoke and is probably panicking, to then aim to go back out on the roads and drive around. Now, anyone who tows a float in general knows that you've got to go a little slower around corners, turns, braking. You know, you're already a slower moving vehicle. So to put a vehicle like that on the road is just, it's another hazard for everybody else to have to work around, aside from putting yourself and your horse in the float directly at risk as well. We were driving out of Seymour the day after Black Saturday, and there was still fire activity. And because this was, you know, nearly 10 years ago basically, communication wasn't as good. And we rang Vic Roads, and I can remember this so distinctly. And I said, I need to get down to Melbourne. I need to get safe. My property has been impacted. I can't go home. I'm sitting in a car park. I need to get down to some family. And I said, what's the best way? And they said, take this particular road. You'll be safe. And we're driving along, and all of a sudden this black cloud of smoke just comes just roaring across the road. And I looked at my boyfriend, he looked at me, and I'm like, holy crap, like, this isn't right. And, you know, all the hairs are standing up my arms, and I'm a real panic merchant, so I'm panicking. And we're driving, and he goes, no, I'm sure it's fine. We could barely see in front of our windscreen wipers, and somehow we managed to make it back. Now, we were completely disoriented by the end of the trip. We weren't on a road we knew, but there were trees everywhere. So, you know, had my boyfriend who was driving at the time made an error, you know, it would have been fatal because we were trying to move as quickly as we could. If there had been emergency services vehicles on the road, you know, they would have been traveling at speed. You know, to have a horse float in front of us would have been really dire at that time. By the time we got out of the fire, we got home to Melbourne. We looked at the clock, I think it was like 1:04 p.m. We looked at the map. That road had been breached at 1:08 p.m. So the fire actually was coming. We were nearly hit by it trying to get out again. But the thing that struck me the most was just the amount of smoke and the low visibility. We were driving blind at this stage. Now, that brings me to another point as well. Don't cut your boundary fences if you're leaving your horses at home and you have to go. If they don't have a lot of space, shut your front gates, cut your internals, open your internal gates, let them run around your property. They will find a safe space on your property, even if it's only a couple of acres. You know, the horses are incredibly resilient. If you cut the boundary fences, you are not only putting them in immediate danger of ending up eating someone's windscreen, but you're putting every firefighter who's out there on a tanker trying to get into a fire at risk. You're putting all of the local residents at risk who are just trying to go. And, you know, hopefully in this day and age, nobody's trying to go at that time. But, you know, things happen and people make silly mistakes. You don't want more hazards on the road. You don't want your beloved animal running around on the road. So that is not a good plan. Neither is going into a fire zone when the fire is already impacting that area. Neither is distressing people by asking them to do that. That's just incredibly dangerous. And I know that, like, my heart was racing reading about friends who are distressed. And I know I have a float and I have a tow vehicle. But, you know, I didn't go into those areas and I didn't offer to help. And, you know, that that's a really hard thing to go through as a horse person. So I think not asking people is also a really helpful thing during that time. You know, don't ask someone to put themselves in danger to help your horse, and don't put yourself in danger and other road users in danger by offering to go and move horses. If there's a fire alert already in your area, it's too late to be moving stock. And I don't mean to preach or be uppity, but this message seems to just get lost in translation because we have this visceral pull and connection with our animals that makes us do silly things, because all we think about is how much we love our animal and we don't want to see them harmed. But what we're actually doing is putting ourselves and our animal in a lot more risk by trying to do things reactively in the heat of the moment and make these snap decisions, which, you know, just can be really, really dangerous, if not fatal. So, my advice is this: if you haven't really thought about what your fire plan is and prepared your property, spoken to your agistment owner, you know, now's the time to do it. We're already in January. It's not too late because we haven't had any major fire dangers, unless you're one of the people who unfortunately were impacted by a recent fire in Little River. But if you are a horse person, you have a responsibility to your animal to know what your plan is. And your plan might be just trusting that the property has enough low fuel areas and your horse has no flammable items on, and they're going to be fine. And your plan is to be ready if something impacts, to move in afterwards and to secure your animal and to provide them with any care they need afterwards. It sounds really selfish, but if that's not for you, you've got another choice, and that's this: pop them in the float on the night like tonight and take them somewhere else. Take them to a defendable area, take them to somewhere a little bit safer. Spend the day there. I mean, if you've got the flexibility to do that, go take them to a pony club ground that's got just a crap load of sand arenas. Tie your horse to the float for the afternoon, pull out a deck chair, sit down and chill out. If that's going to calm your nerves and take your horse out of potential danger, then do that. That's what they mean by leave early and prepare early. Leave on the morning, 7 a.m. tomorrow morning if you've got the jitters, but don't wait until your apps are going to start thinking about it or trying to change plans, make a move animals. It's just disastrous. It's really stressful for everybody concerned. And, you know, you've got to just trust, you know, we get on our horses and we ask them to trust that we're going to steer them well and we're not going to put them in any danger. But sometimes we have to take a step back as humans and trust that our horse has really good instincts and that we have set them up to be in the safest possible position in the event of a fire. So I got a little preachy there. I'm really sorry. This is something that really affects me every year because I think people's plans aren't realistic, because until you live through it, you don't realize how fast fire moves, how just intense the heat is. The smoke just totally ruins your visibility, and just how dangerous a scenario it is. Like, it's incredible. Unless you live through it, you can't appreciate it, and you can have all these grandiose plans. But truly, the best plan is just to set your place up and to trust that your horse has enough space. If you need to move them into a paddock that has no fuel on the ground and you have to hand feed them, you know, a round bale of hay, hard feed, do it. Don't put them in the paddock with knee-high, you know, chest-high grass so that you don't have to feed them. You know, this time of year, if you've got fuel on the ground, move your horse away from that. Put them in the biggest paddock you can possibly find, with the lowest fuel around it, and they will be fine, and you will be able to sleep easy on nights like tonight, like I'm hoping to, knowing that you're well prepared, your animals are safe, and that, you know, every day you tick it off the list until we're out of this bushfire and snake season, which is my least favourite time of the year. Sorry to everyone who loves getting in a bikini and going to the beach, but I am someone who stresses every year in the lead up to when our slithery pals start visiting our paddocks and my fire app goes off. So breathe easy. Thanks for listening to the waffle, and remember, your local fire brigade or the local brigade to your agistment property will welcome any questions you may have about ways that you can make your property more defendable, safe areas, in the region and that sort of information. So they're a great resource to have, and don't be afraid to approach them because they love to engage with the community and put minds at ease and help to support community members. So good luck, and I will speak to you hopefully after a very safe summer.